let's formally start here so I can just welcome everyone. Thank
Yes.
you for tuning in today. I have two special guests today instead of just one, but we have Luca Pasquero Elia of Paitin, which is located in the commune of Neive, in the Barolo I've talked about so much lately. Barbaresco zone. Sorry about that. You probably get a little bit upset when I start talking about Barolo, but anyway.
No, we're
Also,
brothers. No problem.
to talk about the wines and to help me out a little bit with the presentation is my friend Sandro Minella. Sandro, ciao. Sandro,
Hi,
a
everyone.
couple of years ago when I was working with the Consortio, and Sandro would drive me around to a few accounts, and he seems to know everybody in the Barbaresco zone and Barolo zone and the Langhe, and he's as knowledgeable about the wines of Piemonte as anyone, and he's, you can see from that easy smile, he's a very easygoing individual and doesn't take himself too seriously. Also, if you ever go to the Truffle Festival in October and November in Alba, you will definitely see Sandro giving a lecture. He works tirelessly for about, 2 weeks there, maybe 3 weeks that festival.
Well, normally at the truffle fair it's like 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
This year it was 3 weeks, and then we had to shut down.
That's what I was thinking this year, because not being.
But easygoing and everything. It's all because of the great wines we have here. Everybody becomes happy and easygoing when you're drinking.
Yes, this will put you in a good mood, an easygoing mood. So good point. So we have a lot to show today. Let me start off with a question for Luca. Tell us a little bit about the history of Paitin, about your family and how all of this has come together.
Yes, so normally when I have to short 200 years of history in few elements, I speak about 3 men that essentially shaped a bit our winery.
Luca, one second. Can you get a little closer to the microphone?
Yes, sure.
Thanks.
So essentially, when I have to speak about the history of our family, normally I speak about the 3 persons that more or less shaped the history of the estate. The first one was Benedetto. So Benedetto was the first one, Benedetto Elia, the first one who acquired the land where we are today. And this is 1796. So during the Napoleon time, he had the right to acquire these lands because Napoleon was essentially buying land from the church and selling it to some private. So he bought some lands and he kept these for the family. So this was the moment in which the family started owning a vineyard in the area. The second very important man, and this was not about the soil, but was about the vinification, was Giuseppe Elia. Giuseppe Elia was the grandpa of my grandpa, to make it more understandable, where in the late 19th century, essentially, he decided to join the Barbaresco faction. So at the time there was a lot of very independent mind in the area. So in Barolo there were the nobles making the Barolo. In Barbaresco there was a fight between Neive and Barbaresco. Domizio Cavazza was emerging as an important figure here, as the father of Barbaresco, and he joined the line of Domizio Cavazza. So essentially we were the first one in Neive starting in branding our wine as Barbaresco. This is in 1893.
I'm sorry, what year was that?
1893.
Okay. And I read on your website that for the longest time that you and other producers in Neive, you did not want to call your wine Barbaresco. Is that correct? You just wanted to call it Neive.
Yeah, because there was this kind of position that Neive felt so independent and powerful as a village that want to call their wine Neive. But in 1883, we decided to join the Barbaresco faction. But Neive wine still existed for a long time. If you go in the cellar of Stupino family, Castello di Neive, and you look at the 1909 vintage, imitating a vintage that I saw in their cellar, we have in 1809 our wine labeled as Barbaresco.
Okay.
But there, being the Count cellar, was still named Neive because they were proud of this.
Right. I'm going to put up. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So this was the second important figure of our family. So Giuseppe made an amazing evolution for the winemaking. He was able to have a stable dry wine that for Nebbiolo was not that easy at the time, and was starting exporting the wine. We just were looking before to some old documents, and in 1917, essentially our wine were already registered at the Chamber of Commerce of New York. So essentially it was already exporting the wine in the early 20th century. So this spread our wine and the wine of Barbaresco around the world. And this was a very important figure of the family, was a researcher too. So we had a lot of analysis, a lot of statistics about the terroir and the wine itself. I would say that the third important figure for our family is my grandpa, Secondo, who unfortunately passed away this year. But essentially, he started after the Second World War, where our family lost most of the lands, and in a very problematic moment where there were no men working in the vineyards, and a very complex situation for Italy, as you understand, as you probably know. And also the Langhe were afflicted by a kind of a civil war during this time. And he had the courage to take the vineyards without having a father and a grandpa, because they both died in 1938. And so at 20 years old, he started again the winery, bringing back all the books of his father and his grandfather. And little by little, he reacquired most of the plots we lost during the Second World War. And this for me obviously was a figure very important for my growth, for my understanding of the area, for my knowledge of the history of Piemonte, not just the wine, because when you make wine in such a small area, the roots you have sometimes are more important than the technical information.
Exactly right. Now, how old are you?
I'm 29.
Okay.
And I think here we have a picture of.
This is the grandpa of my grandpa, so Giuseppe Elia.
Okay.
Giuseppe, okay. Thanks. And so you're 29. When did you start working at the winery in the cellars?
In 4 years ago, full time. In 2016, I joined the winery after a bit of experience outside, and not in the wine business, by the way. And I come just because they need like a support for the 2016 season that was extremely good.
And so, abundant also.
Yeah, and abundant. So, and I were so happy about my previous work. I wanted to come back to the family for a while. So I started to help, and I realized that my grandpa also was more than 85. I want to spend some time with the family.
Right.
And I fall in love with the business, even if it was already in my vein, but I didn't realize it until I was working directly with it.
I can imagine.
So, I stayed here.
Right. I'm going to put up a picture of Neive, and you tell me a little bit about the vineyards. Well, we have several maps here I want to put up, and then we'll start talking about the wines. But so this first map is, you go ahead and tell it. Here's the three major components of Barbaresco. Tell us about your vineyards.
3 communes of Barbaresco plus a fraction of Alba. So we have Neive, who is in size is the biggest one. Then we have Barbaresco and Treviso in the southern part, with the piece of Alba connected to the Treviso. So this is the map of Barbaresco. Represent not such a big area at the end of the day, because many people, when they see the map, they expect wide regions, but at the end of the day, it's more or less 5 miles of width. And essentially, Neive lies on the eastern part of Barbaresco. And the characteristic of Neive, historically, given a little higher presence of clay in the soil, is considered a little bit more robust and fleshy wines to the respect of the other Barbaresco.
Okay.
This is given mostly by the soil condition and not so much about the microclimate, because the microclimate can be very various. We can go from Serra Boella with 320 meters down to some soils in the lower part of Albesani, where it's much lower and influenced from the river. So it's mostly given, this division is mostly given by the characteristic of the soil. And we are located in Serra Boella, so we are located in the southern part of the Neive block. And essentially, these give us a little bit of distance from the river that for sure influence the wines a lot in the change of temperature between day and night, but also from the influence of the winds that normally in the Langhe during the winter they flow from south. So essentially, we are closer to the winds that come from the mountains or the sea. So essentially, we have a southern, we have a block, little higher hill, what we call the Alta Langa.
Okay.
Is on the southern part, and then after the Alta Langa, we go down in level and we go to the seaside. Essentially, also there is an ancient tradition here that we say that sometimes the grass, especially when you have cows that make milk or cheese, essentially you have some salino, so salty flavors, savory flavors, that comes from the seaside, that is able to influence the grass where the cows or the sheep eat, and so to influence the product that could be the cheese or the milk you are having. And I think this could be also influential on the vines. Maybe it's hard to understand how it's influencing the wine, but for sure the little bit more windy parcels are for sure different from the less windy one.
In my 20-year-old experience bringing people around the Langhe, Barbaresco, Barolo, and Monferrato, of course, I noticed that I realized how important it is. And I know that right now it's not possible, but when it will be possible, I'm inviting everybody to come here. It makes a huge difference. When you're walking through the vineyards, you really feel these climatic differences a lot, and that's like a tongue-in-cheek thing. And now I realize the differences between the wine.
Exactly.
There's still, apart from the numbers that can tell a lot to agronomists maybe, but not so much the general public. But when you come here, the microclimatic differences are really, really huge and really easily. There are some places where it's always windy, even in the hottest, wet summer days. Other that are always warm, even in the winter. Right now, we're just looking outside. Now it's getting dark, but on one side of the valley there was no snow. On the upper part, it was snow.
Yeah, you can almost draw a line where there is snow on the upper side and no snow on the lower side. And sometimes at 50 meters of difference. So you say how can 50 meters influence the character of some wines?
When you walk through the vineyard, you can see that even 10 meters. And your since you have a great historical record of experience in your family, correct me if I'm wrong, but many times when people wanted to buy or sell a vineyard and evaluate the value of a plot of land, they would just check, when the snow was melting or not.
This was the classification of the Suri. So if you go back also to very old exchange of land or evaluation of the sold grapes, people were classifying the areas based on when the snow was melting. So essentially you have a big vineyard, this parcel in the center, maybe a little bit more exposed to south, the snow melt down very fast, so this was much more valuable than all the others.
Okay.
And just not the weather, it's also the composition of the soil that helps sometimes.
I know that about 2 weeks ago there was a big snowstorm in the Langhe. Did you get that snow as well?
Yeah. It was I live in Alba in a little steep road, and so essentially I was alone at home for a couple of days because it was impossible to go down.
I'm going to put up another map here, and this we'll talk about. We'll get away from snow. We'll get into heat. This is a remarkable map. This is solar radiation of Barbaresco zone. Tell us a little bit about that. And when you tell us about that, also give us a general idea of the climate of Neive and the Barbaresco zone as compared to Barolo. Because I know I get the question all the time. I'm sure people watching also want to know, everybody wants to know the difference between Barbaresco and Barolo. So it's a lot to talk about, but if you could mention those things as well.
Sure. So I made this map thanks to the use of an easy algorithm to understand the radiation of the sun on the hills, based on the story of the Surin. So based on this character that that Sandro was explaining before. So always been a measurement, a unit of measurement, very important, the solar power in the vineyards. It's essentially, I realized this map and what you realize observing this map is there are some cool points, some very, very dark blue, that is highlight the very profound valley, maybe exposed north, and when essentially you have very cool, and it's very hard to eat this up, also during the warm days of the summer. Then you have you go in higher temperature, going to the light blue, until the orange is the darker, the warmest part. What is typical in the Langhe is to see the vines in the yellow-orange part. So unless we will face an extremely warmer climate in the next years, this has always been the case, because what does it mean having a warmer climate and more light? It means that you have to treat less the vines, so you can be, if you are organic, you can be easily organic, or if you're not organic, you can let anyway the wine to be more healthy, and so as a consequence of having more quality into the wine. But moreover, it's also a matter of what was before. So for a long time in the Langhe, in the southern and warmest part, we've always had different agricultural times. So could be vines, could be grain. In the 20s in Italy, it was typical to plant a lot of grain because Mussolini wanted farmers to put grain. But essentially, it was the soil that was used. Being used is poor, and so normally we have a calcareous soil, and being very calcareous, this is perfect for the wine. While in the northern side, or the cooler side, normally there was not production of any fruit, of any kind of nutriments for the villages, and so normally the wine tends to be what we call it fat. And so essentially this is not so good for Nebbiolo, because Nebbiolo tends to produce a lot. If you put it in a fat soil, you won't have the great wine you expect from the Langhe. So this is an insight we could read from this map. We can read also the average temperature is much more immediate. Respect to Barolo, so connecting to your question, I think that this is given the lectures of Masnaghetti. So Alessandro is a friend, but is also a great teacher to me.
To everybody.
Yeah, to everybody, I think, who loves
Esatto, sì, sì.
But Barbaresco tends to grow in a different way than Barolo in terms of exposure of the hills. So Barolo tends to have some big kind of hills going north-south, and then a lot of secondary hills that runs through east-west. So essentially, you have most of the vineyards facing south, and the part that is facing north. While Barbaresco tends to have a different shape of the hills. So in Treviso, you can see the same conformation of Barolo, so north and south. Okay. While in the Barbaresco village and in the Neive village, you can easily read it from this map, they are mostly southwest. And these obviously have an impact of the character of the vines, but also the dimension of the valleys. Valleys in Barolo, especially the Brunate, the Barolo Valley goes from Brunate down, is a very wide valley, ample, with a lot of refraction of sun. Here in Barbaresco, we tend to have a little smaller valley that warm up the soil, but with a different pace, with a different rhythm. And so this, for me, is all the small elements together with the soil that impact a lot on the character of the two wines. And moreover, we have the river of Tanaro that has a direct impact.
Right, right.
And moreover, we have Nebbiolo that is a particularly sensitive kind of grape. There's a document, and first of all, I agree with Sherry. This is a really great map, very informative. Thanks, Tom. And in 1303, there was a book that reported, that Nebbiolo was afraid of shadow, so meaning that it's not just about heat, but about the amount of light that Nebbiolo needs more than any other grape variety.
Yeah, absolutely.
With this map, with the solar radiation map, is that the higher solar radiation, is that a direct relationship with the height of the vineyards, or is it more exposure to the sun, or is it a combination of both? Or
tends to be, there are two factors in this map being kind of elaborated by the algorithm. One is obviously exposure, which accounts for 70–80% of the radiation. The other parameter is the openness of the valley. So if the valley in front of you is reflecting some sun, you have a higher amount of radiation, while if your valley is not reflecting any sun, because maybe you don't have another vineyard in front of you, but you have an open valley, you have a less reflection of the sun. So these are the two elements. So part is exposure, a part is the shape of the valley. And so those are the two elements that impact on the radiation.
Okay. And the last little question about Barbaresco and Barolo. Generally, the vineyards in Barbaresco, the elevation is not as high as it is in most of Barolo. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's totally correct. We are closer to the river, so then normally from the river is the lower level we have, and we grow little by little. And normally we go from the 200 meters. I think it's one of the lowest in Barbaresco with the Nebbiolo grape, up to 400, but this is very rare. You have the point of 400 only in Bricco di Neive, in the very highest part of Friesa.
Okay.
But in the past, this was not planted with Nebbiolo, so mostly it was Dolcetto, with more, you prefer a little bit cooler climate.
And Moscato also.
And Moscato also.
We were just discussing with your father that this Serra Boella, where we are right now, it's like an island of Nebbiolo in the middle of Moscato. It was in the past.
Especially towards Asti, we have Asti in a couple of hills from us. It's the Asti region starting, and always been. My father he remembers stories of his father, people explanting some Nebbiolo in some area to plant Moscato, because of an interest in planting this kind of grape. But this area of Serra Boella was always been since we have records, an island for Nebbiolo.
Okay. I'll put up a picture of Serra Boella a little bit later when we talk about the wine. But right now, we'll leave the maps, and Sandro has some really beautiful videos that he shot with a friend.
Yeah. You can come with us, fasten your seatbelts.
Yes.
We'll fly over the winery and over Serra Boella. And here we are.
There you go.
Okay. So that should start in a minute. Okay.
Here we're starting from, let's say, the part of the soil. This is incredible because we are flying over 600 meters of vines, but we have at least 3 different soils. So the one where we are flying now is the more gentle and soft. Now we are starting with the Suri. So this is the Suri, the one under the camera now.
And this is facing towards
southwest.
Okay.
And then the hills is turning again towards southwest, so a little bit more towards west. And this is instead the more masculine and windy part. So, and this is essentially where it's starting the more masculine part, this rose underneath. And it's incredible and when you see the woods, so right after at the end of the vineyards, where we have these woods, is where the soil is completely changing. So we go from what is dated around 9 million years old soil to a 12 million years old soil. So we go from the traditional Marne di Sant'Agata to the Formazione di Lequio.
Which is the same kind of soil that you get in Serralunga that gives the more masculine part of Barolo.
And that, from what I read on your website, it's pretty much, it's not in Treviso or Barbaresco too much, basically only in Neive, correct? Instead of Alien?
No, there is also a part in the lower part of Treviso. So in the lower part of Treviso, there is also a line with Formazione di Lequio. But I would say that anyway, despite being very similar, so this is some videos of the summer.
Showing you the grass, so you don't plow the land between the rows. You leave the grass, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Normally we plant also some kind of seeds. Here we are seeing some between the rows. So some that they kind of plow the soil themselves. So are the plants who are kind of destroying the soil underneath, fixing nitrous. So every plant has his own role. Normally it's a different, more than 10 different plants we plant between the rows.
Also that helps biodiversity, as we can see here.
Yeah, I see the bee there. What are these purple plants? I've never seen those.
So these I think it's a crucifera. So plants that normally they dig and they break. So I don't know.
They naturally plow the land.
They naturally plow the land.
Okay.
And we also have some other nitrous fixer, but normally they are a little bit lower in dimension. And they are funny because when you take them out, they have a kind of a little, if you take them out from the land, you can see some kind of little drops on the roots. And
this is the winery, this building down here.
The winery is divided in two. So one part, the historical part, and the newer one.
And here you can really see the shape of a Serra Boella. Serra in Italian means greenhouse. So when you have a greenhouse, it's like long and narrow. So this is a long and narrow hill with the shape of a greenhouse. So that's why it's called Serra Boella.
Mm-hmm. And Boella, if you love history, is an ancient family of Neive. So normally the ancient family were giving the names to their properties and their hills. So Boella were notaries from centuries. They were notaries of Neive, and they were a very important family who gave the name to the entire hill.
Here we are landing in the courtyard.
Right. Yeah. Touchdown. The last video is fascinating. I just love the
and this is where the grapes come, right? This is the courtyard where you do where you collect the grapes for the harvest, where we crush the grapes.
Yeah, the family developed all the winery around the vineyards. Essentially, the winery is over the vineyard, and so the logistic part is very easy for us. We don't have many other vineyards around.
At Serra Boella, how many hectares and how old are those vines?
So Serra Boella, originally, so you know that the mapping of Barbaresco and Barolo varied across time. Originally, I think the Grand Cru of Serra Boella, if you look at the maps of Slow Food, was around 12, 15 hectares, I would say maximum. It was only on the western side, only higher than 230 meters, 250 meters. It was section kind of selecting some specific character of soil of Serra Boella. Today, Serra Boella is bigger. I think it's around in the MGA or Cru is around 80 hectares. So it became much bigger than in the past. But let's say that the important side of Serra Boella is still the western side. I think on the eastern side, there is almost no people planting Nebbiolo. It's mostly Barbera. Also because the Barbera from this region was very well paid in the past when people were still selling the grapes. I'm speaking about 50, 60 years ago. And so people have some very old plants of Barbera who are performing very well today. Speaking about the age of the plants, so when my grandpa took over the winery, he did a massive job of replanting most of the vineyards, because after the war, they were not pruned well for mostly 10 years. So essentially the plants had to be recomposed, let's say. So he did a great selection massal from 5 years. So from 1948, when he took over, to 1953, he replanted our main part of the vineyards. That is what today is called the Paitin. And some plants of that age are still planted, are the one of the Paitin, vecchie vigne. So what we call the old vines, they come from this old vineyard. And then we replanted in different time. When it was possible, we preferred the selection massal, so essentially taking our best plants and replanting them without knowing the variety, the clones. This was to protect a little bit biodiversity. So in the case one clone was having some problem, was able to resist because of the other one surviving, and also to help the vineyards fighting also some, to create a kind of a natural resistance to some diseases. As you probably know, diseases in the lung, given the heterogeneity of our soils and hills and microclimate, disease can be very different. In Alba, we are subject to black mildew, white mildew, white mildew, while here we are not so subject to white, but more to the black one. So essentially, every soil develops its own, every plant develops its own resistance based on where it grew up. So essentially here we prefer to grew in this way, and the youngest plants in the Suri, so in our main plot, and I would say in Serraboella, are from 1995. So we range from 1953 to 1995.
Yeah, that's an excellent range. One last question before we move to the wines. The one video where you showed the biodiversity in the vineyard, you are certified organic, correct?
Yes, we are certified organic. We started experimenting organic and biodynamic a long time ago in the 2000. First, we started with the Suri. That is much easier, let's say, to practice organic in a very sunny and warm site. We expanded little by little for all the property, and we asked for being certified technically, so not just by the way we were using, but also with an external entity certifying the practices in 2014. So probably not the best vintage to start the certification. But after that, we started obtaining the certification, and we never put anything on the labels. So we prefer to, if people ask, to show them that what is our philosophy, and we are also, I would say, already. Our outlook is to embrace a more wider sustainable practices. We are dismantling all the plastic from our packaging little by little. And this is a battle that we are also trying to, here we are very small wineries, and so doing a battle alone makes no sense. So if we have to be organic or plastic free in the packaging, we have to act together, because alone we are a drop in the ocean. But from my colleagues, especially my age or my generation, they are very well disposed to do this, and so this, I think, organic now is almost the past. So we are already
on the next level.
on the next level. I think now our generation, the previous one, agree that a sustainable way of managing the vineyards is necessary and fundamental. Now we are already on the next path.
Just before we move to the wines, since you mentioned 2014, which was, of course, a difficult year to start an organic because we had like 22 days of rain in the summer. And reconnecting to your questions differences between Barbaresco and Barolo. In that year, there was an average 30% less rainfalls in the summer in Barbaresco than Barolo. 30%, it's a lot. And that's on average. the driest part of Barbaresco compared to the wettest part of Barolo in that summer was 60% less. So
Yeah,
like
huge.
we're talking about two different vintages.
Huge.
And we are 10 miles away.
Yes, not even.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something people should remember when they look at the 2014s, which are still out there, that it was a challenging year, but number one, it was a Piemontese year. So it wasn't international year. It depends on your style of wines you like. We all love the Piemontese style, but also conditions were not as challenging in Barbaresco as they were in certain parts of Barolo. But again, you have to look at each individual commune. But that's a good point. Thank you, Sandro.
Piedmontese do their best when they have some challenge.
Yeah.
When everything is easy, well, we tend to sit down.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's start off with the Friesa 2018. And I have to say, first of all, thank you, because I love Friesa. When Sandra and I go to lunch, the last thing we want to have is a Barbaresco or Barolo, no offense, but we're looking for Grignolino or Dolcetto or something, and Friesa pops up once in a while. So I understand this is, first tell us, where these vineyards are for Friesa, how much you make. And I understand this is the first time in over 50 years that you've made Dolcetto, or Friesa, excuse me.
The Friesa was a project to revive a little bit this vineyard that me, my father, and my uncle decided to give a second chance to this autochthonous grape. We always worked mostly with autochthonous grape, as you probably know, and essentially we had this vineyard in Alba. So it's not here in Neive, but it's planted in the Caveia region, Regoli region in Alba. And essentially we had this vineyard that most of the time was going in the Langhe Nebbiolo. But we always vinified it separately. So until the end, we were able to taste it, to evaluate it singularly. But at the end, we decided to let it go in the Nebbiolo. It's a very small quantity, so we cannot fill a 25 hectoliter barrel. So normally we fill 2 10 hectoliters if the vintage is generous. So it was almost disappearing in the Langhe Nebbiolo. In 2018 we were discussing about this, we were tasting it on the table, and I say, okay, this is 50 years that we are not making it. Either we make it today, or essentially this vineyard will be lost in our past. And so we decided to bet in this grape, and I felt positive on proposing this wine. And I would say that with the younger generation, we're having a lot of success, because maybe they don't know the variety at all. Maybe the problem with the past generation of Piemonte people is that Friesa was more or less the Coca-Cola. So was sparkling, was light,
fizzy.
So essentially people remember this kind of Friesa, and so they are a little bit scared about fizzy wine, sparkling wine today.
Also the Friesa, when it's made like fizzy, not like sparkling, but just fizzy, you feel a lot of strawberries, like strawberry jam, more than everything. So it really.
Friesa is strawberry in Latin, so this is probably was the objective of this wine in the past. We decided to give it a new cloth, let's say, and proposing it in a modern way. So essentially, in a modern in the sense that it's not sparkling anyway, made in a traditional way. We age the wines, so the wine. So essentially, we age normally between 25-50 hectoliters. This is not enough to fill a 25 hectoliters, so we put it in 10 hectoliters. We give it some wood, so essentially from 6 to 9 months. And we propose this Friesa to the newer generation who are willing to revive some old grapes from Piemonte. And I think the character of Friesa is quite Piedmontese. So despite being some way approachable, it still has its own angles. So it's harder to vinify, tends to reduce a lot, tends to be subject to reduction, like Dolcetto. So it's not that easy to vinify, and but the results, when you're able to manage it in the proper way, the results are amazing. So has some connection to the Nebbiolo, is a little bit more approachable. And so I like it a lot, and I did the move after 50 years to propose it again. I hope it will be appreciated, but we are already seeing some nice results.
But I tried the one the other night. It's absolutely lovely. It's a, she said, a very different style of Friesa. It's not the strawberry fruit preserved fruit jam type. It's got some structure to it, and beautiful wine for tonight as well. It's one of my favorite red wines from Italy this year. So let's move on to Dolcetto, the 2019, which everyone has told me in the wines I've tasted was a terrific vintage for Dolcetto.
Dolcetto, again, is another variety that, instead, Nebbiolo, everybody loves Nebbiolo and everybody are focused on Nebbiolo, but it's another wine of the tradition of Piemonte. Sometimes when I have to explain Dolcetto, I say it's the only wine that is glued on the table of the grappas. So essentially, you can bring them, move everything in the table of the grappa, but the Dolcetto should be there. So it's very rooted in our tradition. I trust the Dolcetto very much, and this is coming from an especially nice position. In the past, Dolcetto in our family was from the Suri, but Dolcetto is very subject to the climate change we're facing. So essentially, Dolcetto likes a little bit cooler weather. That's why Treviso was very famous for Dolcetto, because it has lies a little bit higher elevation. Here we are in Rivoli, in Alba. Rivoli is a quite high hill. It goes from 250 meters up to 390. And essentially, the Dolcetto here is exposed to east in this very high hill, and so is able to give the freshness, what we expect from Dolcetto. Not very overwhelming wine, but a lot of complexity in its depth, but approachable. And this approachability and lower alcohol decrease, especially in the past, meant an easy drinkable wine from Piemonte. It is not always the case. And we trusted this objective. So we give, most of the time we pass the Dolcetto in wood, but very old barrels and from 6 months and no more. And this gives the right approachability to the wine. It reaches a little bit higher complexity, but still is enjoyable, fruity, and what Dolcetto should be. So wine that you put in the glass in a few minutes, it's gone. And this is the concept behind Dolcetto. And these vineyards for me is, that's why we shifted from the Suri to this higher elevation, because preserve the identity of what the Dolcetto was and what the Dolcetto we expect to be.
Tell me about, I mentioned that 2019 was an outstanding year for Dolcetto, and of course, Dolcetto is released much sooner than Barbaresco or Barolo or any other Nebbiolo wine. But I understand 2019 from everyone I've talked to in the Langhes, they were telling me that whatever grape you planted, whether you work with Arnese or Friesa, Dolcetto, Nebbiolo, beautiful vintage for everything. Tell us about that year, about 2019.
Yes, 19 was an amazing vintage. First, because was quite good the evolution of the vintage in the whole term. So we had enough rain, we had a warm summer, but not too warm. We only had 2 days of a peak where we reached 43 degrees. That is a lot.
100 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, 100 Fahrenheit in the Suri. But this is now manageable because people understood how to manage the vineyards. So today we are able to not to take out all the leaves like the grandpas were doing in the 70s, where there was a completely different climate. So we were able to protect our grapes from the sun. And then the weather went a little bit down when we were approaching the change of color of the Nebbiolo, and especially we had a very cool night right before the picking time. But when I mean cool night, it means that when you were picking, you were sorting the grapes, we had our hands kind of
freezing.
Freezing. Yeah, you were freezing because like 4 or 5 degrees in the morning.
Okay, wow.
And this is essential for the character of our wines, because we preserve acidity, but at the same time, all the complexity of the Nebbiolo grows, and this leads to a great crude sensibility, because of the becoming the Nebbiolo more complex. It means that you can distinguish some crews, very important crew from Neive, even one nearby the other, but there is a lot of difference because they are able to explore these differences inside the soil or the microclimate.
Well,
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I saw 2019 for me was amazing, and we similarly had a very similar condition in 2020, a little bit earlier. So the harvest was 1 week before or 2 weeks, depending on the area. But right before the harvest, so after the 21st of September, we had essentially a drop down in temperature. We decreased 15 degrees in 2 days, and it was again some gift we received for the Nebbiolo.
In 2020 we needed at least one gift from above.
Yeah, fingers crossed, right? So, so I won't put you on the spot and ask you to rate or rank 2019 among all the other vintages of the decade, which has been a remarkable decade for the Langhe. But would you agree that 2019 for your Barbaresco, these will be wines of beautiful structure that will age for a long time?
Yes, absolutely. I would rank them very close to 2016. We see to see the finish of the evolution, but in the cellar we were happy at the crushing. We were crushing the grape. We were as happy as the 16. I know that in 2018 some areas were hit by some hailstorm in the 5th of September, but this only for this area was a problem. For all the rest, the quality was exceptional. The evolution in the cellar until now is perfect in line on how were the grapes. I would say even better than expected. So we are very, very, very optimistic. So I can see that people that like traditional vintages, not as closed maybe like 2013, but a little bit more forward like 2016, people will be extremely happy with the 2019.
Okay, great. I've got a lot of questions, but we also only have an hour. We have 4 more wines to go through, or 3 more wines, excuse me. We're going to move to Barbera. Now, we do have 4 more wines. There's 3 Nebbiolo and 1 Barbera. So let's talk very briefly about the 2017, what you call the Campolive Barbera del Superiore.
Yes. Campolive is a vineyard that we acquired quite recently, so in 1991, so my age. It essentially was the last part of Serraboella, where the soil tends to be already a little bit more loose and a little bit more grayish and sandy. And so essentially there was a vineyard of Barbera when my grandpa acquired it. So the vineyard is much older than 1991. But my grandpa didn't want to change the soil, the plants with Nebbiolo, even if everybody told them, you're buying this vineyard to plant some good Nebbiolo, no? To continue your Barbaresco vineyard. Instead, my grandpa decided to keep the Barbera. And this gave us a totally different expression from the other Barbera we had. So essentially, after the first harvest, we were sure about keeping this Barbera because it's a warmer site. So Barbera normally shows its power in the warmer site. And was a former olive trees soil plantation. I'm speaking about 300 years ago. Okay. And so many people in the local area called the field of olive trees. In Piedmontese was the Campo delle Olive. In Italian, Campo delle Olive. And so we kept the original name of Campolive.
Yeah, actually in Piedmont until the 18th century, there was a good production of olives. Then they totally disappeared in the 19th century, which was a particularly cold century. But before that, now we are not known for olive trees in Piemonte, but until the 18th century, there was a big production in the south part of Piemonte, at least.
Really?
Many, San Marzano Oliveto, there are many villages that are named after the plantation of olives. So that was a
San Marzano Oliveto, sì. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's move. That was the 2017 vintage, and I know that was an extremely hot vintage. But of course, Barbera, the acidity is so high that if there's one grape that's going to look good in a hot vintage, it's Barbera, right?
for sure. It's the antagonist of Nebbiolo. So when Nebbiolo has some troubles, Barbera is succeeding, and when Barbera is having some trouble, Nebbiolo is succeeding. I think it was kind of a bet the old farmers did. It was kind of an insurance. They were planting Nebbiolo and Barbera to make sure that each vintage, one wine was extremely good.
Right.
And so, but we are very attached to this Campolive, and to give an expression of Barbera that I think in the future will a little bit disappear, because very good soil for Nebbiolo are mostly being replanted with Nebbiolo. So that's why we are even more attached to the tradition of having a Barbera in a pure white calcareous soil.
Good. Okay. Now let's move on to Nebbiolo. We have a Nebbiolo d'Alba, and then we have two Barbaresco. So we have the 2017, what you label as Caveja. Nebbiolo d'Alba. Tell us about that. This is 2017 again.
Yeah, Cavea is another plot we have close where we have the Dolcetto too, or the Friesa. So it's in Alba, it's an estate that we inherited from my mother's side. And this was fully managed by our winery only from 1996. So it's a quite recent acquisition. And this was another historical area for Nebbiolo from Alba. This tends to have a different soil similar to Castigno, Palletto, Monforte. We have Arenaria di Diano. We lie Nebbiolo d'Alba soil is right under the town of Diano. And this gives us wines that are more broad. The tannic structure tends to smooth in a different way from the one of Barbaresco. And also the soil. You can, when you walk the vineyards, or you are zappare, I don't know English, but when you are working the soil tends to have some sands, classical called Arenaria di Diano, with some white calcareous spot in it. And so the wine is a totally different expression of the Nebbiolo we have here in Neive. And we like to make this label only for this kind of Nebbiolo to express the differences. This is also an eastern southeast exposure. So essentially, this also takes some more advantage during the warmer vintages, because it's for sure a little bit less exposed to the sun. But for me, it's a tremendous way to express the difference of Nebbiolo. When we show in our Nebbiolo and then our Barbaresco, the people are already, it's very easy for them to start understanding the differences of our soil, because this Nebbiolo is almost worked like a Nebbiolo. So we give 2 years of age in barrel like a Barbaresco.
I tasted the wine last night and just tasting it again now. Again, 2017, that very hot vintage. So the first thing that struck me was how well balanced and how elegant the wine is. It's the first time I've had your Nebbiolo d'Alba. So I'm thinking, if this is what it's like in a challenging vintage like 2017, I can't wait to try 18, 19, 20, et cetera, et cetera. So complimente.
Grazie molte, grazie.
Okay.
Nebbiolo is a good, way to introduce when you're new to a winery. You start with Nebbiolo. If Nebbiolo shows well, then you're really, looking forward to what's next. Barbarolo, Barbaresco.
Exactly. Let's move on to Barbaresco and your Paitin from Serrabuella. This is a 2017 vintage.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
This is also a piece of land that we have from the Serrabuella.
Talking about white soil.
Yeah, talking about white soil, it's extremely white. Luckily, it's still a bit compact. Normally, soil tends to dissolve quite easily here.
Is that all calcaire, or is there some chalk mixed in there?
Yes, chalk. We don't have chalk here. The chalk tends to be more on Verduno and some part of the Roero. Here is calcareous. It's very, very calcareous and very, very compact. This is
it's mostly silt here.
Yeah.
High percentage of silt.
Okay. All right.
And
go ahead and talk about it. I'm going to put up a picture of the vineyard Serrabuella. Go ahead.
Yes. So essentially, the Paitin is our central plot, most important plot. He's divided by 2 historical blocks. So essentially, there is a line that we call the Vietta, is an old line that divides the Barbaresco, and I would say this line was almost the border of the Grand Cru of Serravaella, because the soil from this line that was designed by the monks many years ago is where the soil starts to change from that point on. And there is another street on the southern border of Serravaella that define our soil. So these two lines are the one defining the area. Is the more southwest exposure of the Serravaella, of the entire Serravaella hill. Is the first part where the soil meltdown is essentially where my family acquired the first plot and where our first Barbaresco in 1883 was made. So essentially is the plot we are more attached to. And also during the Second World War, where we lost some of our properties, this always been attached to the family, because everybody knew that this was the real value of the winery. And since 1883, essentially, we almost made it every year, exception made for 1938 until my grandpa took over. But this is the one that we always made, and even in very challenging vintages like 2002, I remember probably 72, if I remember well, we acquired the opportunity to make Barbaresco, even if everybody decided to declassify the vintage. At the end of the day, we didn't produce the Barbaresco because everybody decided to declassify. But this is a vineyard so well exposed and with a good soil, it was able to grant us a very consistent result through the years. And for us, it's the symbol of the family. The Barbaresco itself, it's made in a very traditional way, like all the wines. For traditional, I mean that the maceration for a Nebbiolo can be minimum 3 weeks up to 6-8 weeks when
long time.
the wines are very solid and we can go with the extraction. After that, we normally do the cappello sommerso when we can, when we think it's valid to do so.
Submerged cap.
Submerged cap, steccatura in our language. And afterwards, they are aged for, on average, a couple of years. All the Nebbiolo and the two Barbaresco, the Serravaella and the Paitin.
And this is all in large cask.
Yeah, we have a 25, 50 hectoliters Garbellotto. The oldest one are from 1974, where my grandpa did most of his new inventory of the cask. So we have 3 that are still from 1974, and then little by little every year we were changing some cask until the younger one is 2016.
Sandro knows, and Sandra also is with me on this, how much we love traditional wines of the Langhe. So I appreciate you continuing that approach in your winemaking. So very, very elegant wines. Last Barbaresco we have is
also, I think they're the ones that are where we can express more the different subzones, the different crude.
Exactly. Yeah, the wines have more of a sense of place, and you get more varietal purity in these wines. So when you age them in the large casks. But last Barbaresco we have about 4 or 5 minutes left, is the Vecchie Vigne, the Reserva Barbaresco from 2015, Sori Paitin from Serravaella. So
yeah, the soil, it's always the same. So it's always the Sori Paitin. This is just a selection of the old vines. Old vines, as I explained before, are the vines planted in 1948, 1953 by my grandpa. And essentially, we introduced this wine in 1999, so not previous to that. In the past, my grandpa was doing Riserva Speciale in some vintages. But in 1999, something happened in the winery. This story was told by my grandma while we were speaking, because I was asking why to divide the Sori Paitin from the Vecchie Vigne, since they are essentially the same soil. She always trusted that vines, when they are older than 40, 45, 50 years old, they have a different, we say una marcia differente in Italian, so they are different pace respect to the other. a different depth, a different character. But in 1999, there was an episode. Essentially, my grandma went to ask my uncle Silvano to go to lunch. So essentially, it was knocking at the door of the cellar. Come, Silvano, we have to eat lunch. And when she opened the cellar, because my uncle was in a tank, so was not able to answer her.
Okay. Right.
When she opened the cellar door, she was invaded. His nose was invaded by perfumes that were ranging from fresh roses to incensus, so fresh flowers and some more deeper character. And she said, well, I was kind of entering the church. She's very religious, and for her it was kind of a epiphany, you know. And she said, "These are the old vines." She asked my uncle what she was.
You knew right away. Yeah.
What she was racking, and my uncle answered, "Yes, we are racking the old vines." And so she said, "Mark this barrel because we will make something fabulous this year."
Right.
And also the vintage was very, very nice. So it was 1999. And so after this kind of epiphany,
like the Blues Brothers, when I saw the light.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I understand this is so limited. You make one barrel a year. Is that correct?
Yeah. We make one barrel a year. The barrel can be various. Normally, on average, is a 25 hectoliter. When we think that is, since it's coming from the same soil of the Sori Paitin, we need to see in the wine the potential to be very different from the Sori Paitin. So when we see this potential, we bottle the Riserva separately. While if we don't see a huge difference, we put them together. So even in some very important vintages, like 2013, everybody expected a Riserva from us.
Of course.
We didn't felt this difference, and so we put them together. So there is not a rule behind the release of this wine. It's very based on our sensation. When we feel differences, we will release it, maybe some years in a row, and maybe it will disappear for some years until we feel it again.
Okay. And again, what's the elevation of these old vines?
The elevation goes up to 300 meters because the very top part is a little bit younger, and it starts, I think, 270 more or less.
Okay.
So it's a kind of a not so high
mid-range.
Yeah, mid-range, but very, very long line.
Great. Well, this has been fascinating. From both of you, Sandro, I appreciate your help, and the videos look great with the drone. I hope you can do a lot more, and some of your insight was great. Luca, this was the first time we've talked, and you're a great salesperson for your wines. I mean, you just, the passion you have, and the wines are just lovely. I had them before in the past, but it had been a while, and I have to credit Sandro with telling me that Luca would like to do a webinar, and I appreciate that. So, but who is your importer in the United States, by the way?
We have different. So
okay. Right.
We have almost 20 importers. The main one, obviously, New York and California with Polaner and Chambers, and then with Maverick.
Okay.
In
Sure, Maverick. Yeah, I think that's a wise decision with a winery like you. You go with one big national importer. It's there's good and bad with everything, but I think it's a wise decision to have a lot of importers. But anyway, the wines are just lovely, and I'm very impressed. Again, when you talked about traditional wines, the wood notes in these wines, they're very subdued, and as we said, it allows the fruit to emerge, and even in a wine like Friesa, I mean, it's an outstanding example. And that Dolcetto 2019, I've had so many good examples from that vintage. This is one of the best, clearly, really, really lovely wine. So. But thank you. I hope we can all see each other in 2020.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Started to vaccinate people here yesterday in the United States, so we'll see what happens. But yes.
Wanted to thank Clay McLachlan for providing us the videos with the drones that we saw before, and we're really looking forward to do this with you. We can do it here, but imagine you have a glass with us right there.
Salute.
Salute.
And we hope to do this in person very soon.
Yeah.
Speriamo, fingers crossed. Yes, so I hope so too. So, buon Natale a voi.
Grazie molte.
And thanks to all the people that that assisted to the show and participated in the chat. I think the conviviality is what makes me really feel in love with wine, is that it brings people together. So through a screen right now, or later around the table.
I absolutely agree. Okay, so great. Ciao.
Grazie
Ciao.
mille. Ciao ciao.
Hi everybody.
Grazie.